Welcome to The Truth in This Art. I am your host, Rob Lee. Thank you for listening, sharing, and subscribing to this podcast. And if this is your first time checking out The Truth in This Art, welcome. Take some time to explore the archive. There's a lot of great gems in there, great guests, and maybe you'll hear one of your favorite artists, creatives, personalities sharing a story in a different way than you've heard before. So today is going to be a treat. Join me, won't you, as I venture into the world of media and journalism with an author, musician, educator, and NPR's first ever full-time TV critic who offers more than just that surface level analysis. Fits right in with The Truth in This Art. Please welcome Eric Deggans. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for coming on. We got two bald dudes, black guys, glasses. It's just to set the visual stage for folks.
Beards. It's all, yeah, exactly, man. And I just got off a Zoom call an hour ago with three brothers who were all bald and glasses and beards. So it's a thing.
It works. It works. I'm moving into sort of this next phase where I'm kind of comfortable with the bald head. I was rebelling against it for a while.
Oh, really? Yeah. Well, I didn't have a choice. I always wanted to see. This is a reference. I'm already dating myself. You're not gonna know this guy, but I always wanted to be like Stoney Jackson. If you remember him, he was a brother that had the Jerry curl mullet. I always wanted that. Like basically the character that Eric LaSalle plays in Coming to America was actually based on Stoney Jackson, who was an actor who looked like that back in the day. And so I always wanted that look, but my hair did not cooperate.
That is one of the funniest things I've heard all week.
I know.
It's funny because we're sort of in this phase and as I think about sort of that moment when I was like, I need to shave it, bro. So before we get into like the main crux of the convo here and, get to more like, hot bald head talk, I want to, give you the space to introduce yourself. And I think
Sure.
it's a lot of power in doing that. Sure. you have people who say, hey, you're a podcaster. I'm like, actually, I'm an audio wizard, if you must know.
There you go. I like that.
So I want to give you that space, please.
Yeah. So the top line, of course, is that I'm TV critic and media analyst and guest host for National Public Radio, where I talk about TV a lot, talk about streaming a lot. And I do it in a lot of different ways where I do reviews and trend stories and think pieces about what I think is going on, but I also do feature stories and interviews and even news stories where I do reporting. And that's the bulk of my work. But I'm also an author. I've written a book about how media and prejudice and stereotypes in society work together. And I teach a course at Duke University that's sort of centered on the concepts that are in that book. I'm also doing some adjunct teaching at Indiana University. So I have this side where I do public presentations and teaching, where I try to talk about some of the ideas and issues and concepts that I wrestle with in my journalism. I also try to talk to them, to actual people, and kind of convince them of what's going on, warn them about what's going on, educate them about what's going on. And then on top of all of that, I've been a musician for 40 years. I play drums and bass guitar and sing, and I'm working with a few different bands here in the St. Petersburg area right now, just trying to do it occasionally to keep my foot in it, and because I feel like that's an essential part of my identity. And I don't want to lose it just because it is really hard to maintain a working band in today's, post-COVID economic environment.
Wow. Thank you. It's a Renaissance man. And definitely that sort of last portion there, all of it, but definitely that last portion, it makes me think of sort of, I'm a week removed from going to a Small Press Expo and being there around all the comics and all that stuff. And I'd interviewed Warren Bernard, and it just kind of dipped me back into what I wanted to be when I was a kid. I wanted to be a comic book artist. And it's one of those things where, I tried to cut that piece off. It didn't work. I tried to go to art school, and it was just like, your work is childish. It's like, I'm 11. So it's one of those things. But, I've been doing this for the last 15 years. And in that time, I was able to rediscover my love of comics. So instead of trying to do all of it, having that, I guess, that time that has passed, I started writing a comic about cat attorneys, and it's ridiculous, but I'm able to get out some of my humor, and there's movie references and all of that good stuff in it. And it's ultimately, I'm getting at, it's the Austin Kleon thing. You don't want to cut away pieces of your creative personality.
Exactly. I mean, you know, it's hard sometimes to find the bandwidth to do things, and it is easy to get in a situation where you're shortchanging some of the things that you're doing because you're doing so much. But ultimately, if you can find a balance and you can be responsible about it. I mean, I'm lucky in that the job I have is really flexible. So when I need to work, when I need to really focus on it, I can really focus on it. And, you know, this week I've been generating a lot of stories, and I've been very focused on, you know, getting pieces published and things like that. And I've been working a lot of hours. So, you know, if I want to spend time over the weekend playing music, I don't feel like I'm shortchanging my journalism because it gives me a chance to focus on something different for a little while. But you do have to be mindful of all the energy and where you're putting it. And it helps for me that, you know, I have 4 kids, but they're all grown. So I don't have to make time for, you know, family in the way that I used to have to do, you know, about 10 years ago. So
that makes sense.
Yeah.
So diving in a bit, could you share like an early experience that, you know, comes to mind, like within your career that's kind of like helped shape and like maybe navigate or point in the direction of the career you're in now as far as cultural criticism?
That's a good question. I guess, you know, we love, you know, these moments, but for me, it was a little bit of a process. And I do remember very consciously when I was in 8th grade, maybe a freshman in high school, a few different things kind of happened. I realized what I was good at, and I realized that I needed to figure out what I wanted to focus on through high school and college. What did I want to study? In order so that when I was done with that, I would have a decent job. And my father had been a columnist for the local newspaper. I grew up in Gary, Indiana. He'd been a columnist for this paper called the Post-Tribune, the biggest paper in the city. And he was, you know, he would do this column that was kind of a collection of here's what's happening at the nightclubs. Like basically, he would tell Gary what Black Gary was doing, you know, what all the Black folks were doing, all the clubs that Black folks hung out at, all the social events that Black folks were involved with. And he went around with a camera and would take pictures and did it all, you know, and just give them the column, like kind of produced, and they would just run it. And then later he did that for a Black independent newspaper in town. And so I realized that it was possible to have a job at a newspaper where you wrote a regular column and you got paid for it. Yeah. And I figured I was good at writing, and I was becoming a musician. I was starting to play drums at that point, and I thought I was pretty good at it. And I was also something of an artist, but I knew that I wasn't good enough to pursue that as a profession. So I just kind of put that to the side, and I said, what kind of job could I have where I can write and I could take advantage of my knowledge of music? Well, I could be a music critic. So I kind of aimed myself at that, where I figured what I would do is I would pursue in my studies journalism and being a critic. And then I would also pursue my music. Yeah. And so, you know, I did that all through high school, and I got to college. And fortunately, Indiana University was an in-state school, but it was also one of the top journalism schools in the country. And so I was studying at one of the top journalism schools in the country, but I was also at a school that had one of the best music schools in the country. So I was meeting all these incredible musicians, and we were forming bands because with the Greek scene, the fraternity and sorority scene, there were tons of gigs that paid well. That you could get if you could put a band together that sounded good. And there were also 2 major nightclubs where you could put on shows with real production, you know, big sound systems, everything mic'd, lighting systems and things like that. So eventually I put together a band that was successful enough that we got signed by Motown when I was in college.
Wow.
And I took 2.5 years off, and I made a record that never came out because about a year after we got signed, Berry Gordy sold Motown to MCA, and a bunch of the acts got dropped, including us. But I had the experience of getting that record deal, going to Chicago, recording a record, tussling with the record label trying to get them to put it out. We had an independent single that had done well throughout the Midwest and was also getting some airplay in nightclubs in England, and we really wanted to capitalize on that. But it didn't quite work out, and I learned that I didn't want to be a professional musician. I didn't feel like I was technically schooled enough. I couldn't really read music well, and I wasn't patient enough. And I just felt like I was a better journalist than I was a drummer, even though I thought I was a pretty good drummer. So then I just turned myself towards journalism and pursued that. But in being when I was a pop music critic for probably about 3 or 4 years at the beginning of my career, and I knew what these artists were going through because I had done it. And when I moved to St. Petersburg, Florida, to be the pop music critic for the St. Petersburg Times. It was the last pop music critic job I had before I became a TV critic. There were 3 bands in the Tampa Bay area that had major label record deals. And I told my editor, I'm going to hang out with each of these bands, and I can tell you after I hang out with them whether or not they're going to have their record deals at the end of the year. And this would have been like the summer, beginning of the summer. So I did that. I got to know each of the bands and did kind of interviews with them, covered them a little bit. And I went back to my editor. I said, they're all going to get dropped by the end of the year. And because I could tell they were having the same conversations with their label that I was having with my label when we were in Motown. I could tell the labels weren't that interested. They weren't giving them money for tour support. When they made their record, they wouldn't spend the money to let them hire top flight producers. You could tell when a record label has signed a band and they sort of say, well, if they do good, they do good, but we're not going to give them many resources, which is kind of what happened to every one of those bands. So I just waited, and by the end of the year, they'd all been dropped, and we did a big story about how all these major label bands that came out of the Tampa Bay area all got dropped. So it was just an example of me bringing my experience to bear as a critic, but it all sort of went back to me thinking, what am I good at, and how can I channel that into a career where I can get a steady paycheck? And it became writing for newspapers, but morphed into what I'm doing now, which is working for NPR.
I mean, that is like, I've asked a question like that of many people, and that is the best fully formed answer that I've got. It's like, man, I did some stuff, and then here I am. I'm just like, wow, it's great. A lot of insight.
I was pretty deliberate because I always feel like, and I tell this to students all the time, if you have a goal, then it makes a lot of decisions for you. I knew when I went into college that I had a 2-track thing going on. I was going to pursue my journalism studies and get my journalism degree, but I was also going to pursue being a musician. And when it got to the point where we had a major label record deal on the table, I told my parents, look, I'm quitting school for a while and I'm going to do this. And then when it does, if it works out, then I'm going to be a professional musician. And if it doesn't work out, then I'm going to go back to school. I'm going to get my degree. And nobody believed me. My mom was very skeptical. My dad wasn't sure what to make of it. The guidance counselor in the journalism school was convinced I wasn't coming back. And I told all of them, I know what I'm doing. and I did, and I had a very clear sense of, I will know when this ride is over, or at least I will know when it's time for me to get off of this ride and go back. And the best thing about it, I almost felt like the universe was kind of telling me I was doing the right thing. So we lost our record deal, and I had to go to the band and say, look, I'm leaving. I was a founding member. It was a big blow to everybody, and I felt bad having to do it. But, I got to go back to school. I got to get my degree. I got to start my life as a journalist. So they hired a different drummer, and I went back to school, and I played with a band that was just local. the band that I used to be with that was signed in Motown, they got a gig to play for 2 months in Japan at a club that was a homage to R&B music and Black music. They loved bringing over bands with Black people and having them play, real authentic American R&B music.
Oh, yeah.
So, but the problem was that the drummer that replaced me was in dental school and he couldn't leave school for 2 months.
Yeah.
And I found out that I could do my last 3 credits by correspondence. And I said, okay, I'll come back to the band and I'll do that 2-month gig. I'll do my last 3 credits correspondence and I'll get my degree. And, when we come back, when we come back to town, I'll start my journalism career and the guy who replaced me can rejoin the band. And that's basically what happened. And so I got a chance to go to Japan and play for 2 months in Osaka at a club in Osaka. And it was an incredible experience musically and culturally. This old R&B band, the SOS band, you may remember them.
Yes.
They played a gig in Osaka. And the thing is, like, there's not that many Westerners in Osaka, and there's really not that many Black Westerners, right? So all we had to do was go to the venue and say we were with the band, and they would let us. We didn't even have to pay. They just assumed we were with the band. And then when the gig was over, we went up to the stage and we told the guys, hey, we're playing tonight if you want to come see us. And so they came and the management set out a table in front of the stage and they got to hang out for free and eat and drink because, they were touted as like VIPs. And then they came on stage and played with us. And the thing was, the single that got us signed to Motown was inspired by the SOS band. They'd always been a band that had really motivated us in terms of their sound and their compositions. And so to have them on stage, we played I'll Be Good to You. At the time, Ray Charles had redone it with Quincy Jones. And so it was a hit at the time. So we played it and those guys sat in. And it was just, it was a great like full circle moment. I could never have imagined when I started this band at Indiana University that we would be playing a club in Osaka, having had been signed to Motown Records, and here we are jamming with our idols, the SOS band. I mean, it was amazing. So, but I was there because I had a goal, and I let that goal make my decisions for me. And I would never close myself off from opportunities if they presented themselves. But I had goals, so I'm getting my degree. Anything that fits into me getting that degree that I can, take advantage of, that's great. But I'm getting my degree. And at that time, by the way, I didn't mention that I had done an internship at a paper in Pittsburgh the summer before. So I already had a job offer from them. So I knew that when I finished the gig in Osaka, I would come back to Indiana University. I'd play for a couple of months with the band, and then I would graduate, and then I had a job waiting for me at a newspaper in Pittsburgh. And all that lined up because I had goals, and they made decisions easy for me. So,
wow, thank you. And it is that full circle moment where you're able to, kind of follow your vision, or as I like to call, to ride that wave. That's what I call all the time. Especially when I'm doing this, I see sort of like, this is what I want to do. And anything that fits, I always say, does it fit? And then I kind of go from there. And you had the added punch of being able to go to Japan, sub in for Floss Mitchell or whatever the dentist sort of name would be and kind of do your thing.
That's a lot better than his actual name. I'm about to tell him that. I'm going to start calling him that. What's up, Floss?
So I'm always with bits. Let's talk a little bit about the NPR role. Let's talk a bit about that. I'm reading first full-time TV critic.
Right.
What? How?
I know. It's really interesting. I mean, some of that is for a long time, TV was kind of looked down upon as a lesser art compared to film. So NPR had a film critic for 25 years before they hired me to cover TV. But it took, I started freelancing. NPR used to have people come on and do commentaries who weren't staffers, because NPR was pretty much focused on news reporting and having people who were reporting the facts and not really presenting their opinions. So when it got to the point where they did have a film critic, Bob Mondello, who's amazing, but they didn't have hardly anybody else on staff whose job it was to say what they thought about something, to regularly issue opinions beyond reporting. So what they would do is have people come on as contributors. And there was a novelist who did it. I always mangle his name, so I'm not even going to try to say it. But and then there was a legendary sports writer for Sports Illustrated who used to do sports commentary. And then I sort of joined the lineup talking about TV, because I had run into a friend of mine got hired by NPR as an executive, and I was visiting him at a conference, and I ran into another editor at NPR, and I said, it's weird to me that you guys don't cover TV that much. And this would have been in 2010, I think. And I was like, you should have somebody like reviewing all the great TV that's out there. And he basically, I gave him my card, and then a few months later he said, well, send me some ideas. And then I did. And then we hit on this thing where it got to be once a week. It started out 3 times a month, and then it got to be once a week, where I would do reviews of whatever was on TV. And it just happened to coincide with the rise of Netflix, and, cable TV was already exploding. So we were seeing HBO and Showtime do all this interesting stuff in addition to TNT and TBS and all these other cable TV channels. So TV was kind of exploding right when I pitched them on letting me come in and do reviews. And then after a while, it just seemed obvious that there was so much going on. When Netflix started offering original programming in 2013, they debuted House of Cards, the American version of House of Cards, and Orange is the New Black. And all of a sudden you had in the streaming space what HBO and Showtime were doing in the cable TV space. And, TV expanded even more. And so it became obvious that they kind of needed a person on staff to do that. And so the person who was my regular editor and I sort of hatched this plan to convince NPR that they needed a TV critic, and then, position me so that if they did decide to hire a TV critic, I'd be best positioned to apply for it. And that's basically what happened. And so I got hired in 2015 after I'd already been kind of freelance. I don't think it was 2010. It wasn't that long ago. So I'd been contributing for a couple of years. So it was probably like 2012 or 2013 when I started doing that. And then, no, I'm sorry. It was 2010. It was 2010 when I had that conversation and I started contributing. And then in 2013 was when I got hired. That's what it is. I got hired in 2013, right when Netflix started offering original content. And now I'm coming up on, in a few weeks, it'll be my 10th anniversary at NPR.
Oh yeah, we're definitely going to have this episode out for that.
Cool.
It's great to hear it, like, being around and being in sort of that space, like, I look at the stuff that I'm doing and covering this, and, been a podcaster for 15 years, but been doing this podcast for about 4, but the volume is pretty insane. It's like 700 episodes right now. And, folks are like, yeah, we just keep you in the mix. And I'm like repitching and like, hey, I'm a guy that does this. And, I have a background in marketing, so I even try to do not making someone feel stupid, but doing this sort of thing. Why hire someone from accounting to do a podcast? Bring in a podcaster. Try to really position myself.
Exactly.
Because it's within the sort of roadmap and the vision of, this is a thing that a lot of people are doing, but it's not a thing that a lot of people do, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's like the way you distinguish yourself these days in this space is constancy and reliability, and constantly providing content. That's why, to take a little bit of a detour, all these people are trying to judge whether or not a platform like Threads, for example, is worthwhile. And I keep saying, like you gotta use it for a while before you can tell whether or not it's going to be a suitable supplement or replacement for something like Twitter. Because Twitter didn't become Twitter overnight. People expect to jump on these platforms and have them immediately be what they want them to be, but that's just not possible. What you have to do is you have to use the platform for a while, and you have to have a reliability and a constancy to your presence before you can really figure out if it's having an impact with the public, if people are connecting with you there, and if it's worth the energy that it takes to maintain that regular presence in that space. So that takes a lot of effort, and it's not something you're going to know in 2 or 3 days or even 2 or 3 weeks of messing around with the platform. Yeah. And that's the yin and the yang of the modern media moment. Our attention spans are shorter than ever, and people expect results faster than ever. But the results really only come to people who are consistent and constant and reliable.
100%.
Fresh Air has been doing what it does for a very long time, and it's always there for you. And you can tune into Fresh Air today, and you can hear that it is different and more advanced and more evolved now than it was 10 years ago or 15 years ago. But it's still here, and it's still offering you essentially what made you listen to it the first time you heard it. And that's the key, really. And it's really hard to do in a world like this where so many things are distracting you, and it's hard to divide your time up the way you need to.
I agree. And, I'm teaching a class on podcasting currently, which is a whole thing. And I'm like, oh, high schoolers, I'm 38 and feel like I'm 1,000 now. And I was told in the first class, you kind of remind me of my dad. I was like, and I don't have any kids, so that definitely felt like a quiver. But
I don't know. I mean, I teach I couldn't teach at the high school level, man. My hats off to you. I don't have the patience. I have to teach people who are adults who I can just say, here's the material. If you're having trouble, I'm happy to work with you, but you have a lot of responsibility to learn this stuff. I don't have to, when they're in high school, so much more of that responsibility is on the teacher, which is hard. But I've done a lot of teaching at the college level, and I actually prefer that. It gives you a little distance, the age difference, and it can make you feel a little ancient, but also, it provides some distance, and it allows me to help them in a way that I couldn't help them if I was more like a peer. I always, when I was in school, I always thought the toughest thing was to be a teacher's assistant. Somebody who's just a few years older than the people who are in the class, but has to sometimes be a surrogate teacher. And it's hard to get that distance. And you may not even feel like you have the experience or the knowledge to fill that role. But, in the work that I'm done at Duke and what I'm going to do at Indiana University, I feel very secure in sort of being the surrogate parent who comes in and tries to coach them through what I'm trying to teach them. And I don't have to feel, there's a distance there just because of the age, and I kind of like it.
So I want to ask you this question. I've been editing and revising as we've gone along, as someone would do. So I think in journalism of like all types, and I'm a fledgling journalist, but in journalism of all types, I think there are certain like ethical questions that one, has to ask in their approach and how they're maybe framing a story or how they're researching a story, what have you. Mm-hmm. What do you think those, like, let's say those two most important questions are in sort of the modern day landscape for journalists, and perhaps if that connects with artists in any way, kind of that sort of question, like the sort of creative like approach, because we're all creative, right? But also sort of the journalistic and ethical component of that.
Yeah, I guess the two biggest ethical components of being a critic in the artistic space is independence. When you're covering people who are charismatic and compelling figures. It is easy to get wrapped up in being attracted to them just because they're compelling people. I've done several things on Roy Wood Jr., for example, and I feel like even though he's younger than me, I feel like we have a lot of common experiences. I love his humor. We are very friendly, and we have a mutual respect. But you do have to be careful that doesn't cross the line into putting you in a situation where, you're giving that subject too much latitude, or you're giving them too much of the benefit of the doubt, or you're not willing to say when they make a mistake or when they do something that deserves criticism. Sure. And so, independence is important. And, sometimes it's just independence from covering people that in the industry and you like and you admire, and being able to have a little bit of independence and be tough on them when they need it. Some of it is financial independence. I'm lucky I work for NPR, which is an established national outlet. I'm doing fine in terms of what I get paid and stuff like that. I'm a professional. But there are people involved in covering entertainment who don't have steady paychecks or don't get paid well. And there's a lot of temptation to do things that might be ethically shady. Vulture just had an extensive look at Rotten Tomatoes and the fact or the allegation that there are publicity firms out there that have cultivated groups of critics that they either pay or that they provide, gifts to or give something to, with the sort of tacit understanding that they would give good reviews to the projects that are represented by their clients. And, if you're somebody who's struggling for every dollar and hustling for every freelance assignment, and somebody comes along and offers you money or offers you free things or offers you access to celebrities, and with the tacit understanding that your coverage is going to be favorable, it is harder to turn that down. So independence is one big important ethic. The other big important ethic is transparency. There's another scandal. I don't know if you'd call it a scandal, controversy. There's another controversy that's emerging today where the New Yorker just published a story about Hassan Minhaj, former Daily Show correspondent, former host of Patriot Act on Netflix. He starred in 2 stand-up specials, one of which won a Peabody Award. And the New Yorker published a piece noting that a lot of the stories that he told in those stand-up specials, especially Homecoming King, the one that won a Peabody, were not true. He claimed to have met someone at his mosque who later turned out to be an undercover FBI agent. That person actually exists. That person was actually revealed to be an undercover FBI agent, but he had never worked in the town where Hassan Minhaj lived when he was growing up, and he had never met him. It also turned out that he told this heartrending story about asking this white girl to the prom and being set to take her to the prom and getting rejected on the night of the prom. And that turned out to not be entirely true either. She claims that she actually told him she couldn't go to the dance a few days before the dance. Huh. And the popularity of the stand-up special led to people figuring out who she was and led to her getting, harsh blowback on social media and from other people because they believed Hassan Minhaj's version of what happened. He also said that his family had received an envelope filled with white powder and that they thought their daughter had been exposed to anthrax and they went to the hospital. He did get an envelope that was filled with white powder, but he knew pretty quickly that it wasn't anthrax. His daughter was never exposed to it, and they never went to the hospital, and nobody connected with it. The show even realized that it had happened. So you're in this gray area of we know that comics often exaggerate circumstances to tell jokes, but when the core of your comedy is I'm making fun of things that actually happened to me, and then it turns out those things that you said actually happened to you did not happen.
Right. Right.
Then, frankly, I think a lot of this would have been solved if he had just been more transparent with his audience about when he was exaggerating things.
Yeah.
And he knows, and everybody, his fans know that the power in a lot of those stories came from believing that they actually happened.
Right.
And so, finding out that he made, not just that he exaggerated elements of it, but that he made up stuff. His daughter did not go to the hospital. Right. He never met an FBI informant at his mosque. Those are central parts of those stories that make them entertaining and poignant. And to find out that they're completely made up is, that's disappointing. And that changes the reception that you would have to the material. You can't, people want to say, oh, he's a comic, but it matters. So in that same vein, though, I think transparency for critics is important too. So, it's important and I think it makes the stories better. If you're writing a review and you're having a reaction to something because of something in your past, or because you've had some contact with the artist before, or because they're depicting something that about, you'd experienced it. I think that can add to the criticism that you're doing, but it is kind of important to try and be transparent with your audience about why you're reviewing something, or why you feel the way you do about it, or why you're telling the story you're telling about it. You don't have to go overboard, but going back to the Hassan Minhaj of it all, one of the things that I keep saying to people who say, well, he's just a comedian, why is it such a big deal? Well, my comeback is, well, then why didn't he just say what actually happened?
Right.
Like, why did he let the audience believe things were true about that story that weren't true? Right. Obviously, he did it because it made the story better. Right. And one reason it made the story better was because everybody believed it had actually happened. And if they had known the actual circumstances, then the joke wouldn't have had the impact, and maybe the stand-up special wouldn't have had the impact. So, that's the answer I also have for transparency. If people say, well, why do you care about X, Y, and Z? I'm like, well, why not be transparent? What's the argument against being transparent? But the thing about being transparent is that it's also important for the audience to know that you have a habit of being honest with them every time you create criticism or you create work. And, again, that connected to the Hassan Minhaj thing, the reason why it might be troubling for people is then you have to ask, he's hosting these shows where a big part of the show is that it talks about things that actually happened. He had this show called Patriot Act on Netflix, and he's being talked about as possibly being the next host of the Daily Show. And so, those are instances where you have to trust that the core of the joke that you're being told actually happened. You have to trust that it actually happened, and that it's not completely made up. So, I'm sure that eventually Hassan will come out on the other end of this, and he may have to do a little bit to sort of prove to the public that he's learned his lesson. And I'm not, we'll see where the controversy goes. I mean, I don't know that it means that he shouldn't have to be able to host the Daily Show or whatever. But what we've learned from seeing other people who were fabulous kind of unmasked in public is that it's really just one thing. If you find that they've made something up, you should be skeptical about everything that they've done. Because often if it's a big thing that they've made up, it's not the first time that they've done it. So, and even in the comedy space, the kind of comedy that John Oliver and The Daily Show and Patriot Act, this topical based in the news, I found this funny fact that, points out the absurdity of politics or whatever. Credibility is a part of the humor. And if you feel like you can't trust what the person is telling you is true, versus the parts that they are obviously exaggerating for humor, then, it kind of makes it tougher to take in the whole presentation. So that's true for critics as well. You want to try and have a track record of being honest with the audience just so they can comfortably trust whatever you tell them, and they don't have to, read between the lines of what you're writing, or, is he really, what's his connection to the person that he's writing about or whatever, but they can just read what you're saying and know that you have told them all the relevant facts as far as and that you have disclosed whatever they might need to know that might affect your process as much as you can, and, there may be times when you forget something, or there may be times when you overlook a disclosure. That's perfectly natural, but you don't want to be in the habit of doing that. You want to be transparent with your audience, as transparent with your audience as you can be.
Yeah. Thank you. That's, even something to think about from this sort of standpoint where, doing interviews and folks say, hey, pull up, come out. And I was like, I don't know. Or even my approach and, how I interview people and things of that nature. I try to stay as neutral as possible. And I just talk about not being able to fake enthusiasm and all of this different stuff,
Right.
In those conversations. And, whenever it's something that feels like it's going to be a puff piece, or they're expecting this is just a marketing thing. It's like, nah, I don't really want to do that. I want to have what feels like a real conversation and get some insight from the guest.
Right. Exactly. Well, it's like that old joke, what works is authenticity. And once you figure out how to fake that, you're in the clear.
I'm still working on it. So let me real quick, and it's not necessarily a real quick sort of answer, but we'll do our best here.
Sure.
I want to talk about race baiter real quick. I see it over your shoulder, obviously, and yes. So in sort of like, so quickly. Tell us, what was the thinking going into the book, and ultimately, sort of like how it shaped your sort of career post book or, post release?
Yeah, so this one is easy. Basically, I had done a lot of reporting looking at how different media outlets use prejudice and stereotypes to make money. And back then, this book came out almost 11 years ago. So back then, these media outlets were much more subtle about how they were doing what they're doing. Nowadays, Fox News is so blatant about how it race baits and how it favors the conservative politics and the GOP, that, it may sound funny to say that I had to write a book to sort of examine how they do that. But back then, they were much more subtle, and they didn't necessarily admit that they were favoring conservative politics, even amongst their opinion hosts. Yeah. So the book was an attempt to sort of pull together all these things that I've been noticing about how media deals with race, and times when commercial concerns would make them hesitant to deal with race, times when commercial concerns would make them lean into prejudice and stereotypes, times when a story like the shooting death of Trayvon Martin kind of became national news, and it's so interesting. I thought, when I wrote the book, that the timeline from when Trayvon Martin was killed to when it became international news was fast. And it was something like 2 weeks. And it's like nowadays, I mean, I think if I'm remembering right, when George Floyd got killed, I think he was killed on a Saturday, and it was national news like by that Monday. Right. And I think it would have been national news the next day if he had been killed during the week. If I'm remembering it right, you might have to check that. But so it's interesting. So many trends that I highlighted in the book are much faster and rapid and more obvious now, but they weren't back then. And so I figured I wanted to write a book because I wanted to present myself as an expert on media, and writing a book elevates your status as an expert. I wanted to be able to give presentations where I could go to a library, for example, and give a speech and not charge them anything, but still make a little bit of money for my trouble by selling copies of the book. I wanted to, I noticed, I'd done a little adjunct work teaching at colleges in Florida. And I realized that there was no book out there that pulled together all this stuff in something that could be like a textbook. So I also wanted to create a book that could be a resource for people who wanted to talk about this stuff, that they could, if they were teaching a class on race and media, they could just buy this book and have their students read it, rather than what I was doing, which was I'd find a magazine article here and a magazine article there, and I'd find, one entry in a book. So I'd have them read a chapter of this book and a chapter of that book. One time I taught a course where I had them reading excerpts from 3 different books, plus a bunch of different links to, magazine articles. And so I just figured if I could write one book where a bunch of that stuff is in there, then you only have to get one thing, And so I kind of wrote the book that I wished I had when I was teaching some of these courses. So all that kind of came together to make sense for me to write the book. And it all kind of worked that way. When the book came out, a few different places, University of South Florida, California State University, adopted it as a textbook. And I was able to give public presentations where I talked about the ideas in the book. And I had a little more credibility because I had written a book. Yeah. and I was able to speak at churches and libraries and in places where normally, there wouldn't be a fee associated, and I could make a little bit of money by selling the book and spread my message to audiences who didn't have to pay anything to talk about it. So it all worked pretty much the way that I hoped it would. And the only problem I've had is just finding the energy to write a follow-up, which I really need to do. But.
Well, master strategist, I'm hearing that's been the theme of this conversation. And this has truly been a treat. And thank you so much. I feel like,
sure.
I don't know, like I want to be like you when I grow up. I don't know. But,
like I said, man, I just feel like mostly it was keeping an eye out and taking inspiration from other people and watching what they did, and then trying to figure out where I wanted to be, using that as inspiration, and then just working really hard to get there. It's just those things. And, I hope that it's an inspiration for a lot of people to try and do the same thing in their own space, figure out what your goals are, figure out the most practical way to get there. That makes sense. And then work really hard towards making that happen, while also being open to inspiration and opportunity when it comes in a way that you don't expect. When I was in college, I wanted to be an arts critic with a national voice. And I always thought it would be as a pop music critic at a major newspaper, or as someone writing for like Rolling Stone magazine or some national magazine. But, when I came to St. Petersburg to be their pop music critic, the print industry started to decline, and those opportunities started to recede. And I began to realize that if I wanted to be an arts critic with a national voice, I might have to consider going to a different platform. And then NPR kind of presented itself, and I'd been a fan of NPR for a very long time. So it was perfect, and the great thing about NPR is that it's public media. So its values about diversity and about serving the public interest are really very much in line with my values as a critic. So it just feels like a very comfortable place to be from that standpoint. I feel like the kind of journalism and criticism that I want to practice is the kind of journalism and criticism that they value and that they expect. And so it's a wonderful meeting of platform and journalist.
It's wonderful. It's great to hear. So all of the goodwill that I've established during this conversation. We're about to just ruin all of it with these rapid fire questions.
Okay.
They're regular questions. Just the only preface I'll give, because I like to set the stage, just don't overthink them. That's always the thing.
Okay.
All right. You're a TV guy, so I got to ask, what are you currently watching?
My TV watching is always a month or two ahead of everybody else. So I just finished watching the first six episodes of the new season of Fargo, which doesn't come out until November. Yeah. I'm in the middle of watching Gen V, which is a spinoff of The Boys. Yeah. That doesn't come out for another few weeks. And I'm trying to figure out what other stuff I'm watching the last few episodes of Billions, which haven't aired yet. I'm trying to figure out if I want to write something about that show. And I'm also trying to figure out, like what else do I need to watch in advance? Like there's other stuff that I've already watched that won't come out for a while. So I have to figure out like what else do I need to get under my belt to see what's coming. The new Frasier revival. I have to watch that. I know I have access to screeners of it. I haven't sat down and watched it yet, but I need to sit down and watch that. So that's kind of where I'm at right now. I'm trying to watch stuff that's coming out in October and November, so I'm prepared and I can suggest what we can review.
Two more. What is your favorite color? You're obviously blued out right now, so I got to ask.
As far as dress goes, I sort of go through phases where, if I see a bunch of stuff that I like in a color, I kind of go for it. So blue has been where my headspace has been for the last year or two. Favorite color. I mean, I love black when it's appropriate and when it's deployed correctly. I don't necessarily wear a ton of black, but I do like to wear it effectively, and I think it looks really sharp when you do that. I do like blues a lot too. I like blue quite a lot, and I like purple quite a lot as well.
That was a very thoughtful answer. Thank you, Eric. This is the last one. I'm very curious and interested in sort of the eating habits of folks. Like, when I'm watching something, I'm sitting there, with the girl face, we're watching probably Winning Time or something.
Sure. I just got the finale episode and just got access to the finale episode of this season.
I got to catch up. Got to catch up. I'm like 4 episodes behind or something, but it's like you have like in a wine pairing with a certain meal. I have a food pairing or a snack pairing with a certain show. Sure. Whatever the show that just comes to mind for you, tell me what the food pairing or the snack pairing would be if you're snacking while watching that show.
Oh yeah, well, see, you caught me at a bad time because I've had to lose weight, so I've had to shift how I eat, which means I can't snack. That's one of the big things is you really got to cut down on snacking. And I also have to cut down on, I have to be very selective about carbs that I eat. So that means no chips, that means no pasta, that means no rice, that means, and even sort of nuts and peanuts and things like that, you have to be careful about how much of those you eat. So I've changed my eating a lot in the last month and a half or so. Popcorn is always, I just feel like that's a universal, if you're sitting in front of the TV, to eat kind of thing. For me now, a lot of it is fruit. So grapes and applesauce, believe it or not, I'm still a big fan of applesauce. I had to be careful about eating it because I can eat too much. And I used to eat cereal, but I can't do that anymore. That's too much sugar. So I pretty much given up cereal. And I would highly recommend that everyone do that because, the thing that's I don't want to sound like when somebody freshly alters their diet, all they can do is talk about what they eat. And I promise I won't do that to you. But the thing I have learned is that you can make simple adjustments to your diet and you can lose more weight than you think and you will feel better. And one of the things that you really have to do is be careful about the sugars that you consume. So if there's a way to cut out simple things like don't eat cereal especially kiddie like cereal.
Yeah.
Is there a way to cut down on or cut out chips and potato chips and stuff like that? Even popcorn can have a bit, but if you're careful with it, that's the lighter version of all that stuff. Of course, cookies and candies and things like that, if you can cut those down or eliminate those. But, you don't have to make like huge changes and come up with a whole meal plan and all that shit. You can just kind of cut things out. So when it comes to snacking, be judicious about it. Don't snack very much and try to choose snacks that are healthy or that don't have a lot of sugar in them. And just stop drinking soda, stop drinking soda.
So one, I want to thank you for coming on and spending some time with me. This has been enlightening. I feel like this is like the highlight of the week for me. And
wow, thanks, man.
Yeah, absolutely. And two, I want to invite and encourage you to share with the listeners where they can check out your work, social media, website, any of that fine stuff in this sort of shameless plug portion as we wrap up here. The floor is yours.
All right. Well, of course, a great deal of my work is at npr.org. So you can go there, and there's a search bar at the top of the website where you can plug in my name, and it will bring up a queue that has all the stories that I've done, digital and audio, and you can read them, read transcripts, or listen to them if you're so inclined. My personal website is ericdeggans.com. And there's a lot of work and links there as well. Particularly, there's a roster of my speaking engagements. So, I'll be at the Texas Tribune Festival in Austin next week. I'll be appearing in Bloomington, Indiana at a fundraiser for the NPR station there the week after that. I've got some other things coming up, so you can keep track of stuff there. And of course, I'm on Twitter /X @Deggans. I'm on Instagram @edeggans. I'm on Facebook. I'm on LinkedIn. And if you go to my personal website, ericdeggans.com, you'll see links to all the other social media platforms there, as well as some videos. When I was on Samantha Bee's show, Full Frontal, that's up there. When I interviewed the correspondents of the Daily Show for South by Southwest, that's up there. I gave a talk based on my book about how to talk about race across racial lines, a TEDx talk, that's up there. There's a lot of cool stuff there, so you can check it out.
And there you have it, folks. I want to again thank Eric Charles Deggans for coming on to the podcast and sharing a bit of his journey and his insights. And I'm Rob Lee, saying that there's art, culture, and community in and around your neck of the woods. You've just got to look for it.